In this clip, we're going to talk about how we make observations of hardness in our mineral samples. Hardness is a quantitative observation. It's relatively easy to make. And because it's quantitative, we lose some of the qualitative or subjective nature that we had when we had trouble describing luster of some of our mineral samples. So hardness is a great observation to make. It's relatively easy to do, and it's giving us useful information. Now, hardness is a relative thing. In the lecture, you became familiar with Mohs hardness scale, which ranked 10 minerals on the basis of their hardness, 1 being softest to 10 being hardest. The hardest common mineral is quartz, the hardness of about 7. There are rarer minerals, such as diamond, which are even harder, which we did not, of course, provide samples of in your mineral kit. Your mineral kit also includes, of course, the ceramic tile, which is useful for testing for hardness as well, because the ceramic tile has a hardness of about 6.5. As a result, it's harder than nearly every mineral in your set. When doing hardness, you'll also want to gather some other common objects from around your house that can be used to test for relative hardness. Glass has a hardness of about 5.5. You could use a glass pasta sauce jar or something like that from your kitchen to test for hardness. A nail has a hardness of about 4.5. It's a little bit softer than the glass plate at about 5.5. And a penny, should be able to all afford a penny to dedicate to this. A penny has a hardness of about 3.5. So what we're going to do, I've laid out some minerals. These minerals have a wide range of hardnesses. We're going to test the relative hardness of each mineral and test it against the known objects. 6.5 for the ceramic tile, 5.5 for the glass plate, 4.5 for the nail, about 3.5 for the penny. If you want an even softer object, your fingernails have a hardness of about 2.5. So let's see, does this sample, is it harder than glass? Well, let's see if we can scratch the glass. We are able to scratch the glass with this sample. That tells us that this sample is harder than glass. It's harder than 5.5. Let's see if we can scratch the ceramic tile. The sample is also scratching the ceramic tile. And so that tells us this sample is harder than 6.5. It's probably the hardest sample that we have here. Let's test this guy. It's not scratching the ceramic tile. Instead, it's leaving a streak, a white-colored streak. The sample is much softer than the ceramic tile. Does it scratch glass? It does not scratch glass. The sample is, again, softer than glass, softer than 5.5. What about the nail? Let's see if we can use the nail to scratch the sample. The nail does leave a clear scratch against the sample. The sample is softer than the nail. Can we scratch this sample with a penny? We can also scratch the sample with a penny, so it's softer than 3.5. This is a pretty soft mineral. Do my fingernails scratch it? Fingernails having a hardness of about 2.5. It's very similar in hardness to my nail. My nail is leaving, my fingernail that is leaving a shallow mark on the sample, but I'm also breaking off little flakes of my nail against the sample. That tells us this sample is approximately equal in hardness to my fingernail, so it's at about 2.5. It's a pretty soft mineral. Let's test this guy. Start with something in the middle. Start with the nail, hardness of about 4.5. The nail is able to scratch the sample, but just barely. suggesting the sample is quite close in hardness to the nail, which has a hardness of 4.5. Let's check it against the glass. This sample does not leave any scratch on the glass. Instead, we're getting pieces of the mineral sample left on the glass. The glass is actually scratching the mineral rather than the other way around. So the hardness of this sample is pretty close in hardness to that of the nail, about 4.5, maybe slightly harder, 4.5 to 5. Let's test this guy. Start with the glass again, something with intermediate hardness. Scratches the glass. That tells me it would also scratch the nail. It would also scratch the penny. In other words, the sample has to be harder than all three of these objects, harder than 5.5 because it is scratching the glass. Let's check it against the ceramic tile, hardness of 6.5. It's very similar in hardness to the tile. It appears that the sample is not actually scratching the tile, but instead is leaving a white-colored streak. So that suggests the hardness of this sample is about 6.5 to maybe 7. This guy, we already identified as having a hardness greater than that of the streak plate. Let's see which of these two samples is harder. Let's try to scratch this sample with this one, see what happens. This sample is being scratched by this sample. That tells us this is the harder sample. This has a hardness of about 6.5, this more like 7. So you can see what we're doing here. We're putting our samples in order of their relative hardness, and where known, comparing that to our known objects. We've got 2 more samples left to do here. Let's start with the glass again, something in the middle. The sample is scratching the glass, but just barely. That means it should not scratch the tile, and it does not. Instead, it leaves a streak, a green-colored streak. That puts the hardness of the sample something less than this one, something more than this one. Our last sample is this guy, and I can tell from handling it that it's very soft. Let's go ahead and just see if my fingernail scratches it. My fingernail easily leaves a scratch in this sample, telling us the sample is softer than my fingernail, softer than 2.5, putting it all the way down here at the end. So we've now ranked our minerals in order of relative hardness. We can check our results by making sure that every sample we said was harder scratches every sample that it's softer than. Let's, for example, take this one. We had it ranked somewhere in the middle, harder than these two, but softer than these 3. That means this sample should scratch each of these 2 minerals, which it does, easily scratches that one, but it should not scratch the minerals that we ranked as harder. And it does not. It does not scratch that one, does not scratch this one, and certainly will not scratch this one. Instead, this sample is leaving a streak against the sample that's harder. So we know our results are correct because this sample scratched everything softer and was scratched by everything harder.